Hey, there we are. Woo!
Awesome.
All right. Woo!
Amazing.
Panelists.
Oh, the amazing panelists.
It's a real thing.
Yes.
All right. All right. All right. Hey, and we are live. Welcome, everybody. Welcome,
Woo!
Brian.
Hey.
Hey,
We'll see if, I mean, there's no way for me to check like how many people are watching this live, but I'd be shocked if there's like 10. We'll find out. But hey, in any event, just wonderful to have you on the program. Welcome to the Blueprint Sessions, Brian.
thank you
My
all
name
for
is
having me.
Rob. I am the managing partner of 70S Associates, and the other panelists, Albert and Lynette. Just real brief, Albert, you are with?
I'm with myself nowadays. But formerly, I was formerly a startup founder, and I was also head of Google for startups in Korea. So
Right on.
that's my creds for being
That's
on.
right. Lynette?
Awesome. Hey, Brian. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you. I'm Lynette Kioski, managing partner for Reach Canada. So we are the Canadian arm of the prop tech growth program out of NAR.
Right on. And Brian, I figured I'd save you because this show is really all about you and
Totally.
talking to you and talking to you about module. And I've done not a whole lot of research, but just looking real quick, you do have one of the more fascinating backgrounds. So I thought, let's just give you the floor to introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about how you came to be where you are today.
Sure. Well, thank you all for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talking to meeting you guys for the first time. So it'll be fun. I think I'm gonna have fun. It seems like a great energy. So my name's Brian Gaudio. I'm the CEO of Module, and we are a housing startup based in Pittsburgh. But prior to starting Module, I had been working in the built environment previously. So I was trained as an architect. So went to architecture school, got my professional degree, and was working a couple of different areas. I had interned at Walt Disney Imagineering. So that's the design studio that builds the Disney parks. So spent a little bit of time there in a very, very non-traditional, you get your architecture degree and you go work for a firm. I did not do that out of school. So I interned at Walt Disney Imagineering. So very blue sky. I worked in the blue sky department. What new concepts can we bring in the next 5 years to the Disney parks? That was a really exciting, fun experience for me. But ultimately, my passions lied at the intersection of good design and impact. So, after graduating, I spent some time abroad and in the Gulf Coast of the United States working on affordable housing, working on disaster recovery housing, and thinking about those problems and where design and architecture can play a role. So I spent time in the Dominican Republic as a Fulbright scholar doing urban design research on disaster kind of recovery. Spent some time in Biloxi, Mississippi at a nonprofit architecture studio there that actually had started after Hurricane Katrina, but it continued to help rebuild that area. And then also worked on a documentary with a friend. We co-directed kind of a bootstrap documentary about the housing crisis and ways architects, governments, and builders in South America were trying to solve that. So that's kind of the background before starting Module. I was kind of learning about housing, learning about design in high impact areas prior to starting Module.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things when I look up your name. The first thing that pops up is filmmaker. I was like, do we have the right guy? But so I guess, before we turn over and just talk, I guess I'm just curious because I've obviously been looking at the industry for so long. So when you're coming into this, you're looking at housing, you're looking at it from a perspective of architecture design. Like, what did you see as sort of the biggest flaw? Like, what did you see as the fault that you had to try and solve?
So I saw the biggest fault was, the as it relates to housing, you think about what is the purpose of housing? Well, the purpose of housing is to provide, shelter, literally, for people, right? For the occupants. And when you think about how we build housing in the United States and other places, I think we've gotten away from that sometimes, right? We think of housing as sometimes in a particular, almost a securitized investment. And so what I saw was a disconnect between the occupants of housing, whether they're renters or owners, and what their needs are, and then the producers of housing right on the other side. So whether that be developers or home builders, and the product that they were putting out there versus the needs of that end occupant. I thought that was misaligned. And that was really why we started Modular, was how do we bring the occupant back to the center of housing development in the United States.
Can you give me an example? Like, what do you mean by misaligned? Misaligned how?
So, the average, let's look at like single family new construction housing. When we think about single family housing, obviously in 2008, we had the financial crisis, right? And the mortgage crisis. That was a real sign that the industry may not be in a great position. And since then, home building has recovered. But what we're finding is that the kind of traditional single family home that, you think about when you think about a large production home builder, it might be a, 2,500 plus square feet. It might be upwards of 4 bedrooms. And it's really thinking about the nuclear family, right? As well, everyone must be mom, dad, and 3 kids, right? And that's the entire United States looks like that. And that's really what the home building industry was set up well to serve, in my opinion. However, now the household size has really shifted, right? The number one household in the U.S., this was pre-COVID, so I'm not sure if the statistics have changed, but number one household in the United States is a single person living alone. And so household sizes have gotten smaller. Multi-generational housing, especially with millennials living with parents, have really disrupted what I think of as the kind of typical household in the United States. So I felt that single family, the typical home, 2,500 plus square feet, 4 bedrooms, that doesn't serve a lot of people who need housing. And that's kind of, I think that's part of what I'm talking about as it relates to a disconnect.
All right.
Can we actually, I feel like we're jumping in right now already. I would love to just hear a quick summary of what you guys do. I'm coming into this very blind on purpose, not because I didn't want to research, but I wanted to hear it from your mouth. What does Module do?
So Module is a human-centered home building brand. And we leverage a series of standard designs that are smaller. So they're smaller than 2,500 square feet. Specifically for urban infill sites. So we work in cities where there's vacant available land, kind of we call missing teeth lots. But we've developed a series of standard homes that fit infill properties. They're designed to be a healthy home. They are thoughtfully, curated in terms of the interiors and the materials we're putting in the houses. And then when I say we're a 21st century brand, we leverage prefab construction. So this, not that it's a new construction method, but I think it's where the industry is heading. So we're leveraging modular and offsite manufacturers to actually build the homes. The home you see behind me was built in a factory. And then we have a website where customers can go make reservations to purchase a home and really take them through the process in a more transparent fashion than most home builders. So it's kind of 21st century product tailored to that new household types that are being underserved. Urban infill types of developments that we build, and then use prefab construction for a number of reasons, which I can get into later, and then really a website that's transparent about why we're making the decisions we make as in our product, which is a house.
Awesome. Okay, that makes a ton of sense. Now I'm going to go back on what I did and rewind a little bit more too. I'd actually, instead of talking too much about Module right now, I'd love to hear kind of how you got your team together. You know what I mean? Like that process in the beginning. What was that moment? Because it's a big decision. I'm going to start a business. I'm going to quit my day job, right?
Yeah.
What was that process like? Who are the early people on board? Maybe what did your family think right? I would just love to hear that initial process. When was it actually? When was it that you guys decided to do it?
So it was really in 2015 when I initially thought about starting the company. I was living in the Dominican Republic, finishing up the Fulbright fellowship, and I was trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do next? I'm not going to live in the Dominican, as beautiful it is. I'm not going to continue living in the Dominican Republic. I could go back and work at an architecture firm, or I could try to start something and start something that reflects the values that I have. So, this was around the time that our documentary was in edit. So I was kind of clicking pause and play and clipping video footage from some really innovative projects in South America. And one of those innovative projects was called Incremental Housing. So the idea that you could start with a starter home that was, as small as one room and literally add stories onto your house over time as your means increased. Right. In some places in South America, you can't get a mortgage to finance your house. So you're literally just saving up enough cash to build the next room. And that was one of the ideas from the documentary that we had, that I thought had some really interesting legs. So the idea for Module was initially this incremental house, the home that grows with you. That is so cool. How can we bring that kernel of an idea to the United States and start a company around that? So that's really how that was the initial kernel of the idea. So I essentially moved back to the United States, actually moved in to my, I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Dominican Republic. I moved into my parents because I was, I'm going to start this company. So I moved back in with my parents and started working, 3D printing concepts. Actually called up my high school shop teacher and he said that, sure, you can come in and use the shop. So I literally moved back in at home, was, messing around with 3D printing little models of the concept. And I started talking to some of my friends who I trusted and had known for years about the idea. So really, I have 2 other co-founders, Drew Brisley and Hallie. Drew's our chief product officer. Hallie's our director of design. And I'd known Drew since college. So I've known him for over 10 years. And we had worked together starting a nonprofit previously. So he was someone I trusted. He's an industrial designer by trade. So really someone who understands the user. So Drew and I were basically talking, and there were these startup pitch competitions in Pittsburgh. And I told Drew, I said, hey, I'm going to apply for some of these startup pitch competitions, but we need to look like we're a team, right? It can't just be the one guy who lives at home and has is 3D printing houses. We need to be, we need to have a team in place. So I said, if we get into one of these competitions, will you fly to Pittsburgh and be my teammate? And he said, sure. So that's really how Drew started to get involved with Module. Yeah, that was Drew's involvement.
How'd you guys do in the competition?
So the first incubator program, it was this boot camp that we applied for. This was February 2016. We came in, we literally, Drew made this wooden model, and we thought, should we make it look like a house? Should we make it very, very abstract? So we were design school, people, so we're like, let's make it abstract. So we have this little wooden block model, and we walk in front of the judges. I'm like, this is what we're gonna do. It's this little house. Don't you see it? And they were like, no, we don't see it. So we didn't get into that program. Long story short, we didn't get into that program. But then the next competition, we actually placed first in that second competition, and we won $500. And we looked at each other and said, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with all this money? How do we split it? What's the next step? So it was that was how we got things started.
Awesome.
So can I jump in, Albert? The weird thing about this platform is I can't see everybody to get the facial cues. Like, I don't want to step on anybody, but I don't know if you're ready to ask the next question. But I would love to carry that line of the story along, because really that's the beautiful thing about a startup is every startup is really telling somebody's story, right? And there's a genesis behind, bringing this solution to market. And so I'd love to know kind of what that next part of the journey looked like. So great, you have some idea, you're very passion driven, obviously, from seeing some need in the marketplace. How did you go, what were sort of those next steps you guys took, you and Drew and Hallie, to, sort of figure out if there was some real demand out there? And then, And then what were the first things you did to bring this thing to life?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and Hallie, I met her at the time. She was working at an architecture studio designing a tiny house with an architect. And so she had this passion for smaller living. And now she was working with an architect, and the plan was to make an affordable tiny house. But, a high design architect, the house was going to be clad entirely in glass. And so the project was never going to be built. But I told Hallie, hey, maybe we can join forces here. Module, we have some of the same values as to what you're working on. So Hallie joined our team as our director of design. So after that, we went and we filed some intellectual property around a removable roof system. The idea that you can pop the roof off and add stories on. So we do have some intellectual. So we went out and filed some intellectual property. That's not necessarily what our core business is today. We're really just leveraging prefab to build sustainable, beautiful homes. The expandability is kind of a cherry on top for folks. But we filed some intellectual property, and then we looked at the local startup ecosystem here in Pittsburgh, which, Carnegie Mellon is based here. Some of our team are graduates of Carnegie Mellon. So there's a decent startup ecosystem in Pittsburgh, and we applied to one of the local accelerator programs. It's called Alpha Lab Gear, and it's a hardware accelerator run by a group called Innovation Works, which is a local seed fund in Pittsburgh. So we applied to that program. And at first we were waitlisted again. We didn't get in, but then someone dropped out of the program and we were allowed to join. So in that program, we started essentially prototyping our product. And the challenge with when your product is a house is like, this is a big thing to prototype. So while digital models are great, people who are customers, who are consumers, who want to make a purchase decision, they really need to see something, right? When it comes to a house. So we tried to figure out what is the smallest prototype that people could get a feel for what our homes might look and feel like. And so we joined that program in the fall of 2016, and by the demo day, which was the spring of the following year, Hallie had actually built what we called our demo unit. So it was not a full house, it wasn't fully permitted, but she and her partner, who were contractors as well, literally built a home office, a movable modular home office space, about 250 square feet, that we could move around the city and just pop up in a particular vacant lot and show people what we were doing. So that was kind of the next step, was building that prototype. It was not a full house, it was not permitted by the city, but at least it gave folks an idea of what the product was.
Cool. Can let me jump in real quick. Just the one thing that I'm immediately getting, Brian, from your story is that it feels like a social venture a little bit. Like you were talking about your time in Dominican Republic, and about providing homes for people who need it like desperately, things like that. So it feels like there's definitely this kind of social impact portion in it, but also it's a really awkward space to be in, right? When you're kind of a social venture, you want to do good and you want to have impact, but you need to also like have investors and make money. So I'd love to hear what your thinking is around that, and also what your founders' thinking is around that. Like, do they want to do good or do they want to make money? And I know that's a really horrible dichotomy, but it's a dichotomy that we all have to face, right? And so I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts around that, whether or not that's changed over time, whether or not you've sold out, right? Like there's nothing wrong with selling out. You got to sell out at some point, right? How are you dealing with that, and how your founders feel about that?
So that's a really good question, because initially we had thought about forming as a B Corp. But when we went into these accelerator programs, they really said, look, if you want to raise outside capital, you should really become a C Corp. So we started as an LLC, but we transitioned to C Corp. But I agree that our team, the reason our team is here today is because they wanted to see something better for the housing industry. And I think we've learned along the way that it's really challenging. The housing industry is regulated. There's so many aspects, from the finance aspect to the regulatory aspect with local permitting to zoning regulations. So initially, like when we started the company, said we're going to solve the affordable housing crisis, and like that's what we're going to do. And then we've really, like, over the past several years, we're like, holy hell, it is really complex. And it's not about the cost of construction oftentimes, right? That's not necessarily, it's not a silver bullet solution to that. So I think over time, we've learned that there's a way to build a company. Like, most of our homes are now market rate homes. We do build some affordable housing and work with some nonprofits, but I think we've landed on the idea that you can build a company that is impact oriented in ways in terms of sustainability of what you're doing, and then some sort of ancillary components of your business, which, like, one of these houses, so we built a mixed income housing development behind me, 4 units. One of them was affordable housing, which we got some grants to subsidize. So we have done some of that impact driven work, but we realized that the affordable housing sector is highly regulated, and it's in the funding, the federal funding that used to exist, this was pre-pandemic, wasn't really there. So it'd be really challenging for affordable housing to be the core line of business for us. So really the core line of business is, let's build a great house that's sustainable, and then let's try to do some good along the way. And I think that's kind of where we've settled right now.
Mm.
Amazing. I actually just let these guys know I have so many questions. That's their heads up that they've got to talk.
It's all you, Lynette.
Down. Yeah.
No, it's all you.
No,
you go, girl.
Step back. I mean, I'd love to dive into a little bit more in a bit around things like, your capital raise, where you're at, kind of all of that type of thing, kind of market traction. But before we get there, I do want to kind of understand again how you kind of went out and product market tested, like product market fit tested, right? How did you know that what you guys were onto, the market actually wanted or demanded? So I'd love to know some of the things that you did to test market, test demand, test the type of structure, right? Like, I love the theory around it, but you probably skin that cat, 100 different ways around which path to go down to meet some of those needs. So I'd love to hear a bit of that story too, Brian.
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So one thing we did, so we built this initial prototype, which gave people enough. I mean, we did get a lot of people who thought immediately once we built this small little prototype that we built tiny houses, which was not the case. So we had to kind of, let people know that we're not necessarily building tiny homes, even though the first prototype we built was smaller. Right. In terms of like product testing, we created this. So we got into South by Southwest. They have this startup accelerator pitch competition.
Oh, yeah.
In 2017. So we were a finalist for that. So we went out to South by Southwest, and while we were there, we created this housing personality quiz, which was essentially, what's your, gathering some information about you. And then we would send, in some cases, we sent responders, here's the house that fits your needs. And we made a little rendering with them inside, right? There's a sort of a test we did. And it was a way to gather input from folks on what size house they're looking at, number of bedrooms and bathrooms, price point, things like that. So when we had over 1,000 respondents to this quiz, and people were like more than willing to share information about how they were living, what type of lifestyle they had. So we found that to be really interesting, and that informed, the product that we were building. So that was one way we started doing user testing. The other way really was kind of proof in that, one of our mentors really suggested that you guys are building a really cool thing, but, money talks ultimately. And so go out and see if you can get, sort of like the Tesla model, get $1,000 deposits, and see who's willing to do that. Really see if people are willing to put their money where their mouth is and buy a house from you guys. And that was a really hard thing to do, because a startup company who has never built a house before is trying to get people to, agree to build a home with them. So we launched this pre-sales model, and we probably put in, 60 to 90 days of that effort. And we got about 10 pre-sales. So that was interesting to see what types of customers were coming to us. And a lot of them identified with the sustainability movement. A lot of them were looking for alternative types of housing. So that we started gathering data on that. But one thing we found was, just because you pay $1,000 does not mean you're going to buy this house. And that was something that, yes, that purchase intent can be used in other product types, but with a house, I don't think that's actually the right measure
Mm-hmm.
to show purchase intent.
Cool. I mean, I love that you took a couple of different tactics and you were willing to kind of, discount what some of your expectations were through that process as well. And without really a lot of upfront investment, right? You can get a lot of intel and detail from the market just by asking a few quick questions and testing some of your own assumptions, right? Around, will people follow their money? And maybe the question is even how much money do they have to commit before they'll follow through on intent. So very cool. I love that.
Yeah. And I forget if you had another follow-up question to that.
No, I mean, I think, well, the other piece of it was then how did you know, like, that what then kind of led you down the path of the modular route versus, because I mean, for all intents and purposes, I mean, you're a developer, right? You're developing homes, you're taking a specific tax, you're filling a niche, but what made you sort of land on the modular approach? And I think you touched on that whole notion of it. We weren't really a tiny house solution, but you then kind of evolved down this other path. I think that was the other piece of it.
So one of the reasons why we looked at prefab construction was the idea that you could add a story onto your house instantly, right? If you had a story manufactured in a factory, shipped, you could literally make an addition to your house in a week as opposed to 7 months, right, to go get the contractor to show up and whatnot. So that was one reason why we looked at offsite construction. But then the more we learned about it, the more that we realized that is the more scalable way to get our product in the hands of more people. So the idea that you could have regional manufacturers working with us who could ship our product to local contractors who build basically the foundation, and we could be leveraging regional factories to ship our product to local developers and builders in other markets. And we found that to be a more scalable approach than literally hiring, having to control. It's an easier quality control measure than literally trying to regulate every single general contractor around the United States to build our homes. The other thing that I think the industry is really struggling with is a labor shortage. And so a lot of people in the industry are turning towards offsite construction, whether that's panelized construction or full volumetric modular, meaning boxes are built in the factory, is because it's so hard to find local labor. And the potential of offsite construction to leverage even more automation could help the labor shortage. So we think, we want to tie our destiny to that offsite, we call it offsite construction supply chain, because we know that that's where the future is. And that's where you can get economies of scale in terms of repeatability of a product.
Super smart. You can go in any direction.
So I have a general industry question. Then I think I have a couple of personal questions because, as it'll come obvious, I've actually been looking at modular housing. I'm actually in the market for one. So, this is going to ultimately become like, hey, sell me. But before that, I mean, based on what you said, the thing that I could never figure out with prefab, with modular, with any of this stuff, right, is why isn't this more of a norm in just home building, just developer world, right? And I'm thinking about so I lived in Houston for many years, and they're just building like crazy. Mm-hmm. Right. And in every city that I could think of, the suburbs, especially the exurbs, are building like crazy. And so you have the Pulte homes and you've got the big developers, right, going in there and really doing this. And it's still very traditional. And it's still very, stick. And I can't remember what the construction methodology is. But they're not doing what you just described, right? Like prefab, delivered to on-site and the installation. Why is that?
So a lot of those groups weren't set up to effectively use offsite construction, and there's probably a number of reasons why. It's like a big, they're a big behemoth and they're used to doing things one way, and for them to change would completely disrupt their business. So it's a real disruption for them to leverage offsite construction on the single family side. But I think a lot of multifamily developers, especially on the coasts, are now leveraging offsite construction. There's been a ton of VC money going into prefab construction companies in California because basically there's not enough housing units and housing units need to be built faster. And what's interesting is there's now developers in the West Coast that are literally buying offsite built product from Poland, from China. So housing units that are built in a country, an ocean away, shipped on a barge, installed in the Bay Area, and that's cheaper than hiring the guy in your backyard. That blows my mind, and that is a sign of a real problem. So in my opinion, the United States as a country, we have to really figure out how to leverage offsite to build housing units, or else we will start to export import the construction industry from other countries. And I think that could be a real challenge, economically. So I think that's one reason is they're doing it the same way, and change is hard. I think another reason is there's a perception issue. While the sort of developers that build multifamily are all interested in offsite construction right now, you ask the average homeowner on the street, hey, do you want to buy a modular home? And they're going to scratch their head and say, does it have wheels on it?
Yeah.
Because they're used to thinking of a mobile home, and that's the picture that they have in their mind is a trailer home that's probably not in the best condition. And that perception problem is a challenge, I think, for the industry to be pulled forward.
Okay, so the next question I've got is so my wife and I we just bought some land. So as a result,
you're a qualified customer.
I'm a qualified customer. And now it's not in your wheelhouse from what you've told me, because you focus really on cities and urban infill, whereas this would be mountain cabin type situations. However, as a result of it, I've gone down this rabbit hole in the last couple of weeks about modular homes, because it just sort of made sense to me. And what occurs to me is it's a pretty crowded field, man.
Yeah.
And so, the number one, I think, just one of the most established company would be, what are they called? Modern? Yeah, they're based out of Bellingham, which I knew because Sonny's from Bellingham. Real high-end modular construction. Then you've got guys like A-Frame and Arc Shelter and Koto with their Adobe. And, and then internationally, it's even much more established is what it feels like. Europe, they've been doing this for a much longer time. Architect designed, green energy, zero energy certified, all the stuff that you guys are. So I guess my question is, you're in a pretty competitive field. Do you have like a unique value proposition, or like what sets you apart from one of those guys?
You're right. The space has gotten more crowded, and there was a company, I guess it still exists, Katerra, that had raised over $1 billion from SoftBank and said, we're going to be the Tesla for construction, and we're going to completely digitize and automate construction. And they raised a ton of money. They're probably the largest group in the space. Now they primarily serve like multifamily, but then you're right. There's a ton of folks on the West Coast that are high-end prefab homes. Dwell Magazine years ago, I don't remember when that program started, but they had an issue every year, which was called the prefab issue. So Dwell Magazine on the West Coast started kind of associating prefab with beautiful, with sexy, with bespoke architecture. So I think because of that, you've seen a lot of companies on the West Coast offer this really high-end, beautifully designed product. And a lot of those homes are a lot of them are sometimes multi-million-dollar homes, right? $1 million and plus. And the product that we're building is really a market rate. Our homes in the city of Pittsburgh will sell, including the land, all included, we're, $300,000 to $500,000, that type of price range. All included, right? Sort of turnkey, including your land.
Right.
So we're serving maybe not quite the luxury market. That's one distinguishing point. And I think the other point is that our long-term plan isn't to serve one-off homeowners. Every single person in the United States, right, hires Module to build a one-off home, because we see some challenges in scalability there. While we love and we are serving one-off customers right now, we help them find land. We help them build a house. We're actually building our first house in Seattle. So the first house outside of Pittsburgh right now in Seattle. But the future state of Module is to enable mom and pop builders or amateur real estate investors to use our brand of homes to build product in their communities. So it's more of a B2B2C play, I guess, if that makes sense. The thinking, if we can sell 5 homes to that small builder in, you know, Cleveland or DC or Philadelphia, that can get our product in the hands of more people.
So I think the next question is, I just don't know, right? But looking at some of these modular prefab, at least for mountain cabins, the per square foot construction cost is way more. Actually, it's more expensive than traditional construction. Like, you would think it would be the other way around. To your point, it should be much more affordable. Why isn't it?
So that's another challenge, and maybe with adoption, you know, as I think about your question about the builders, at this time, because 3% of the residential single-family construction industry is built modularly, there's just not enough. There's not enough supply for pricing to really become, you know, less than stick frame construction. So in many markets, modular is just as expensive, if not more expensive than stick frame construction.
Right.
And, you know, the reason, I don't know about the particular companies that you're speaking with, but what we've found is, you know, the reason, like our homes, so just, you know, this is some of the projects that we just built.
Yeah.
So this house, about 40% of the cost was in the factory, but 60% of the cost was the site work, right? The foundations, the utilities. So while we're able to save some cost in terms of what's built in the factory, oftentimes a project's budget is made or broken by what we call the site work. So excavation, utility connections, foundations, things like that. So that's one, that might be one reason why. I think the other reason is that the, you know, the factories that we work with, they might build 100 to 200 homes a year. They're sort of smaller factories. So compared to like a production builder that's building thousands of homes a year, then there's just a difference in terms of like the size contractor, if you will, that you're using. But I think that is a challenge to the modular industry, is that people assume that it's cheaper, but it's not necessarily. What it will save you on is time. There's a considerable time savings to using modular construction, and we see that as actually very valuable. 40% faster construction time. So you think about, you know, the duration of a project, and the longer a project goes on, the more likely that your labor is going to leave, or the bank's note is going to come due. So we're able to much more quickly deliver projects and get them closed out than your standard home builder, infill home builder, because of the prefab construction. Because at the same time the local contractor is building the basement, we can be building the house in the factory. Whereas normally you have to wait for the basement to cure and then you put up your walls. With modular, we can really truncate that process. So as we talk about modular, the big benefit is time, and then quality control in the factory, because you don't have to deal with the elements when you're building, because you're in a weather-controlled environment.
Cool.
Awesome. So Brian, I want to test something out with you here. I want to do a little bit of a rapid fire, just to kind of level set on a couple of things that I know we could talk expansively about, but I just want to get a really quick sense of. So first of all, how big is your team? You've talked about your 2 co-founders, but then how big is the rest of your team?
So right now we have 5 on our team.
Okay, so 5. Second question, this is a sub question then. The 5 on your team, is that team plus who are you hiring your labor? Are you hiring your labor, separately? So are you contracting labor?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Funding to date. Have you raised any capital?
We've raised about 1.7 million so far to date.
Okay. Awesome. And what's your current market traction? So how many units do you have in market? What's your kind of trajectory?
So first home was delivered in 2019. So we've delivered 5 homes to date. We're going to start construction on another 10, I would say, this year. But we've gotten thousands of inbound inquiries from around the country about, hey, can you build my, cabin home up in wherever, right? So we get a ton of inquiries, and we know there's actually a market demand for the product. But but we've primarily focused on Pittsburgh. So of those 10 that we'll build, 9 of those are here in Pittsburgh, and 1's going to be in Seattle, the first time we try somewhere outside of the city.
Very cool. Okay, so that's it for the rapid fire, and where I'd like to kind of, and then I'll park and I'll hand it over to Albert or Rob to pick up again. But we're like kind of on that basis. How are you cutting through the noise? So I just kind of want to connect, the piece that Rob was talking about in terms of like there's a lot, like it's a crowded space, right? And
Yeah.
obviously worthy, and I think to your point, the more traction this particular model gets in the market, the price will come down, because my sense is there's a lot of intrinsic costs built in, right? Like just the acceptance of modular, which you've already identified. I know in some jurisdictions, at least here in Canada, there's a restriction against building modular because for a long time there was a bias against safety and the rest of it, right?
Yep.
So there's a lot of noise, I think, like on the intrinsic part. But how do you specifically cut through the competitive noise in terms of building market traction going forward? And how are you generating these 1,000 inbounds and then prioritizing them? Lots to unpack there.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the inbounds, I think we've been written up in a good number of national publications, and people just really identify with the way we've laid out our product and how we speak about it and talk about it. In terms of competition, when we, at the beginning, after going through the sort of accelerator type program, and we did Techstars up in New York, we were talking to a lot of VCs, and a lot, VCs are, who's your competition? Well, there's, this company, and they've raised 30 million, they've raised 20 million, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But really the competition that we have is the homes that are for sale in the markets that we're building, right? The other housing supply in the market that you're building. So that's, as I think about competition, that's really what it is. It's very real estate. While we can build a beautiful product, our product is tied to a physical location. And that is very different than a startup that's developing a product that's, that you can purchase and walk out of the store with. So, that's how I think about competition. But previously, we're always tracking these other sort of prefab competitors out in the market. And what we realized is, my God, we have hundreds of thousands of housing units, that a shortage in the United States. There is more than enough for multiple people to be building great prefab home product out there. So the market opportunity is so great that we really have to think about what markets are we going into and how are we going to be competitive with the product that's coming online in those markets. That's how I think about it.
Okay, cool. Thank
Awesome.
you.
I'd love to jump in here. So without getting too strategic, I think it's amazing. First of all, you guys have 5 homes. I want to say that's easier said than done. And I think it's amazing that you're going to do 10 this year, right? Like we get so focused in on can you do 1,000? Can you scale out? Can you win the $1 billion market? Well, it all starts with this early stuff. So I want to say that's awesome.
Thank you.
It strikes me as this process of building modular homes, it strikes me as that there's a lot of operational excellence that's required here, right? When you do it, I feel like maybe the pieces don't fit, maybe the customers complain, maybe I feel like there's a lot of know-how that has to go into this. And I actually feel like that could end up being the comparative advantage, right? Like doing this well without it fucking up, doing it well without customers being pissed at you all the time and suing you all the time. So I'd love to hear, of these 5 homes that you've delivered so far, what you've learned from that process of kind of doing that. What were some of the mistakes you made early on that you're and you don't have to reveal it if it's your house, your specialty, and you now know this stuff that nobody else does, but this know-how, what's some of the know-how pieces that you've picked up along the way that, either you can improve on or that, you're pretty good about, you're pretty happy, hey, we ran into this, we solved it. If this happens again, we can scale it out.
So those are very good questions. And I think you learn from those initial customers a lot, right? Because we've sent out surveys to the homeowner who lives here and the one behind to gather feedback on that, because, it's not like we've built 1,000 homes and we've used the same system. So a lot of the systems, the HVAC systems, the flooring, a lot of this is new product that we're testing, so to speak. So what we've learned is, one thing we've learned is that the factories that we work with actually build a really great product. I'll take you guys here. I'll just This is
show
our
us
show.
the house. Yeah, I was gonna say, show us the house, and like we'd love to see it.
So this is like our show home space here.
Yeah.
Let me see.
All right.
Okay, so the unit's 16 feet wide. So from here to here. Sorry, I can't do this point.
Yeah.
You're doing great.
Up to the stairs. Up to the stairs, right?
Yeah, and the reason why is that's kind of the ideal dimension that's the max width you can ship in Pennsylvania. So if we build homes that are 16 feet wide, then we can finish all of the drywall, the plumbing, the lights, and the flooring even in the factory. So if you build wider homes, you can do that, but it's multiple boxes put together, and then you can't get the benefit of the factory in terms of finishing more scope in the factory. So this kind of gives you a sense of the product. But one thing we learned was the factories actually put out a very good product. So we were hesitant initially. We said, well, we'll finish some of the flooring and some of the cabinets on site, just to have our local contractor do that. But after seeing the quality that the factory put out, we said, actually, let's get more into the factory, because that'll save us on time to market, essentially. So that was one of the things that we've learned.
So cool.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some of the other stuff. These windows, for example, these are some really high quality windows. And I forget if it was Robert who talked about Europe, but these are European window product. And they're just far superior than anything that's built in America. And so
now, real quick, Brian. So looking across the street out the window, I mean, I see some other homes just sitting there, right?
That's
correct.
The
price the same between this show unit you guys have and one of
question.
those other homes across the street?
Very good question. So, that house right there, that sold in this area of Pittsburgh. That sold for $439,000.
Okay.
And that's it's a bigger home. I would guess 2,500 square feet.
Okay. Do you know about when that would have been built?
So that was built, in the early, probably in the early 1900s is my guess, and it's been
really.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So the challenge with Pittsburgh is, and I'm just going to pop back outside here.
Yeah.
So Pittsburgh is a very old housing stock. So that house across the street, you could buy an old house for $439,000, or this house, which just sold in February. This was sold for $405,000. So this is our home that we built, a new home.
Wow.
Zero energy ready. 1,500 square feet plus a garage, 3 beds, 2.5 baths for $405,000. So you can buy that existing home, get more square footage, but you're going to have a lot of maintenance and upkeep. Or you can buy our smaller home, which on a per square foot basis is going to be more, but your maintenance, your energy bills are all going to be much lower, right? So, we're working in markets where, the city of Pittsburgh has 30,000 vacant lots in the city. So there's a ton of opportunity to build new construction here.
Okay.
One of the other lessons we've learned is dealing, when you're working with one-off clients. So this house was built on spec. So we raised the funding. We created a special purpose vehicle, raised basically $1 million to build these 4 units, built them, and then sold them. And while we've worked with clients, we do work with clients on sort of semi-custom homes. They pick one of our models on our website, and then we take them through the process. What we've learned is that the time to deliver that house might stretch much longer than if we can build homes on spec and find customers on the back end. So that was another learning process, was really some of the benefits you get with modular are that you can standardize things, and the design process moves faster, the construction process moves faster. But when you have a customer on the front end working with us to build a home, they can say, well, can we change that? Can we change that? You know what, this? And then they have to go get financing. So there's a bit more, I guess it's just a more longer and drawn out process. That's another thing that we've
It's almost right. It almost seems like modular homes, like the average person like me who doesn't know anything about this stuff would be like, oh, modular, that means I could customize more and have like rooms here and there. But it seems like what you're saying is the less customization you have, the more benefits you can get and the higher quality and the faster, right? So it's almost like you almost want cookie cutter rooms, right? If you want to really fully reap the benefits.
Yeah,
but
that's correct.
Cookie cutter is really nice.
Yeah, we kind of develop those designs based on certain customer personas. And the
Got
the
you.
more simple the easier the client, if they're able to select one of those standard designs, then the process will go much faster.
Tell me a little bit about your clients, the demographics. I mean, because when you started this, you started talking about millennials and their, et cetera. Like, what are you finding? Who are your clients?
So our clients have varied. First we were like, oh, it's going to be millennials because we're a millennial, right?
Right.
It's kind of that argument. Well, millennials, I mean, they are one of the largest, kind of cohorts, if you will. But what we found is that your average millennial, the average millennial in the United States is broke. They have student loans.
They still can't get on the home ownership ladder. I mean, It doesn't matter what the home is; they can't afford it. Totally.
So what we found is we've served a number of customers now of our and we've served some millennials. Most of those millennials might be working at, like locally here in Pittsburgh, they might be working at Google or, a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon University. So they're kind of highly educated, Tesla driving, sustainability nerds. We've also served some older clients. So our first house was actually a couple. They were probably in their 40s, but they were building a home for their parents who were downsizing. So they were sort of building a backyard mother-in-law suite for their parents. But they also cared about the sustainability factor of our home. So I think the common thread is really the sustainability factor of our homes, because you can add solar panels and go net zero, which I think that's the kind of the niche that we're serving. They either drive a Tesla or they want to drive a Tesla. They care about the environment. And they want something that's that feels, beautiful when they walk in. Space is not their amount of space, number of square feet is not their number one priority. So we serve millennials, we've served folks in their kind of 40 and 50-year-old range, but I think the common thread is that sustainability and that they don't need a ton of space.
I'm curious, Brian, as a startup, right? So 2019 was your first product in market, and you have some great plans for this year. And I just want to echo what Albert said earlier. Not only kudos to you for having 5 houses in market and plans to do 10 this year, but doing it on the amount of only on the amount of capital you've raised. Given the space you're in, that's really impressive. So good for you guys. That's awesome. I'd love to know though, as a startup, what's your North Star? What do you guys work toward every day?
That's a good question. And as you talk about the capital raise, what we found is we're not a fit for your traditional venture-backed company, because they're looking, mostly for software type business model, right, with a recurring revenue stream. And we don't fit into that. I think previously we were trying to fit ourselves into that bucket. And I think we've realized in the last 2 years probably that that's not necessarily the type of investor. There may be certain VCs, but that's not necessarily the type of investor who's the right investor for our business. So I think realizing that was really important for us, because when you go through that accelerator kind of rabbit, you put your blinders on and you just jump into the accelerator, you're like, okay, let's go. We got to go talk to VCs. We got to go get some money. And it hasn't been without challenge that we've built the company on that small amount of capital, right? Our team has had to make sacrifices. And I think the North Star for our team is really that they care about building. They have all experienced in one way or another the failure of the housing market in their profession or in their personal life. Like one of my co-founders, Hallie, she was renovating a 22,000 square foot home. And she was doing this. That was kind of her and her partner had a renovation business, and they were doing that over and over again. And they were talking to the owners, oftentimes, to the owners would be crying. They'd be like, I can't deal with this anymore. This is such a terrible situation that I'm in. And so she realized that, wow, there's something wrong with that. This person thinks, you'd think that they have the 22,000 square foot house, they've made it, but they're really just paralyzed by it. So I think our team, we brought on people like Hallie and other folks who really care about putting out a better quality product, and they care about elevating the industry. I think that's really the North Star is how do we pull the industry along, and it's probably what keeps us motivated on a day-to-day basis.
Very cool.
Since you brought up the word industry, I guess I'm curious about it, right? So obviously you're actually in the housing construction industry. You're not in the quote, real estate resale industry. However, I have to think there's some connections. You know what I'm thinking is like one of the longest readers of my blog, Notorious. His name is Brian Hickey, and he has a company called Teardowns. And he and I have gone back and forth on a lot of issues. So hopefully he's either listening or he'll watch this later in the recorded thing. And he's for the longest time been talking about teardowns in cities, exactly like talking about like that's unlock the value, et cetera. When we talked to City Builder, we talked about highest and best use, but those are all sort of still kind of peripheral. What's been your experience to the extent that you interface with realtors, with brokerages, with MLSs? Like, are they ready for this sort of thing? Like, what if anything would you want to see from the industry to kind of help drive this?
So the short answer is I don't necessarily think that all realtors are ready for this. And actually, one of our teammates, Lou, got his real estate license. We were trying to figure out who should we hire to sell these houses.
Why don't we do it ourselves?
Right. So Lou was like, just give me the book. I'm going to do this. And he got his license, and he became a licensed agent in Pennsylvania. And he sold both the affordable house, which had some subsidy behind it, so it was a challenging sale. I mean, the price point wasn't challenging. It was $185,000 for the same quality house that's next door selling for $400,000. But he got his license, and he is trained up on the product. And I think that's a challenge. Is we've been trying to educate realtors, at least in the Pittsburgh market, about why building modular is a more sustainable way to build, and what are the benefits of that. So we've hosted some realtor webinars. We just had one this week about debunking the myths of modular. And there's a group called Howard Hanna, which is a real estate brokerage that's it started in Pittsburgh.
We know Howard Hanna they're like the fourth largest brokerage in the country. So
yeah. So they're based in Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah,
and their CEO is trying to stay on top of where the industry's headed. So we've been working with them to educate some of their realtors about prefab construction and about our brand.
Interesting. All right.
I have a few questions. Sorry, I know we're approaching an hour, but I actually wish we could.
We'll keep going.
But okay, so my first question is, what's like the sweet spot for the geography? So in other words, like you're building this in Pittsburgh, and I'm assuming that it's partly because you're local there, right? But what I'm saying, like, does it have to be in a city? Or can it be, like in a suburb, or can it be in not mountainside maybe, but what's like the sweetest spot, city / environment for these homes that you guys are making, like $300,000 to $500,000 house? That's my first question. I'll ask the second one real quick. Does this have to be for homes? Can it be for like storefronts or for commercial or other office type situations? And I'm wondering what your thought process was around that. So those are two unrelated, but questions that I had to get out.
So in terms of markets, you're right. We started in Pittsburgh just basically because I'm from here. I think one of the benefits and potentially the downsides of Pittsburgh. So one of the benefits of being in Pittsburgh is the amount of vacant land we have in the city. 30,000 infill lots, not in the tier 3 suburb. I'm talking about in the urban core, right? These were 3 vacant lots that we purchased from the local redevelopment authority for a very reasonable price. So cost of land is relatively inexpensive in Pittsburgh, and there's a ton of it. The challenge, though, on the other side is that housing prices are depressed because of really the steel industry, which died in the 1980s in Pittsburgh. That really depressed the housing prices here because there was so much population loss. So I think that's some of the benefits and challenges of the market that we're in. But right now, we actually are doing a market study and trying to identify other areas that our factories, in this kind of Northeast Mid-Atlantic. Where can our factories serve? And then where are there markets that have a reasonable amount of available land, a price point that we can serve, and a need for new construction housing? So we're just kicking off that market study. This month we kicked that off, and we're starting to now make inroads into some other areas in the Northeast Mid-Atlantic. But But to answer your question, it doesn't have to be just urban infill. This could be a suburban product. What we found, I think to Rob's point earlier, was Pulte can just build homes for so dirt cheap that we are not competing with a Pulte home, right? That's kind of this large tract development. We're competing somewhere between bespoke architecture and spec house. That's kind of where we're falling. But we could build suburban homes. We can build rural homes as well. So it's not necessarily limited by the geography. I think, the one limitation of modular is just making sure that the site that you're actually going to build on can be accessed by a truck and a crane. So that's something we do for each project is doing this. We call it a modular feasibility study, just to make sure that the trucks and the crane can get there. And then what was your second question? I'm sorry, I missed that.
My second question was, have you, not just for homes, but also like commercial or storefronts, have you thought of kind of that application or what?
Yeah, so we've thought about multifamily. So we do have a multifamily product, the idea not just for sale housing, but rental housing. So we have been working on, and we have a few models on our website that are more multifamily. And in terms of commercial, we've had some groups approach us about that. We're actually serving as a consultant on a project that is, there's a developer in Pittsburgh that's putting an outdoor food and beverage park, if you will. And initially they're like, oh, let's use shipping containers because that's cool and it'll be cheap. And then they walked down the line and they said, wow, this is not going to work. So they called us up and they said, hey, can you help us out? So we're actually helping them, not necessarily our core business, but sort of in a consulting role, helping them find a commercial modular factory that does custom commercial modular. So we are involved on that project, and it's going to be for outdoor food and beverage places where it's sort of like a coffee place, a taco place, and something else. So we're doing that. It's a different product. It's a very different product. There's a different building code, right? Commercial building code versus residential.
Got you. Yeah. Got you.
So it's not necessarily something we're going to take on, but if an opportunity came to us, we might be able to help.
Right.
So I'd like to kind of follow up on that in a couple of ways. One is just a straight question. I don't know the answer. What is one of your, let's say, I'm looking at some of your models. What is just the building itself? What's the cost of that? Say like a Haven, 2 bedroom, 2.5 bath, 1150 square feet.
So the cost of our houses themselves, because the pricing
just the house,
yeah, that's a good question. So typically, the cost of the house itself from the factory is going to be $100 a foot to maybe $120 a foot, depending on
pretty cheap, really. I mean, when you can look at it, right?
The cost of the factory is not the expensive part, and this is kind of what I was trying to get to earlier.
Yeah.
Right? You figure that's very reasonable. The challenge with housing construction is all of the other things that are built on site.
So would you happen to know what, and again, I should probably ask Brian Hickey, to be honest with you, what the cost of a teardown would be?
So teardown, I think about it as, what's your acquisition cost of the house, right? So you factor that in. And then demolitions, depending on the size of the home, it could be $10,000 to $20,000, maybe. That would be my guess.
The reason why I'm asking is I was looking at that house, a 100-year-old house, right? And let's assume you're not in some historic zone and that's not some historically important house, whatever. Yep. So basically, that homeowner is just living in an old, shitty house. It's basically what it comes down to. Fine. Right. Let's say I'm a homeowner and I buy a house that was built in the 70s and it's a piece of crap. But I own the land, I own the house, right? I mean, if I were to just say, screw it, I don't want to add on, I don't want to renovate. Yep. I'll tear down and buy one of your homes and just plop it right on.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, what because I already own the land. It's already sited. It's already plumbing, electrical, all it's done. How much is that going to cost? Is it about $100 a foot plus $20,000 for teardown?
For a teardown, yeah, I think the added cost would just be the cost of demolition at that point. Let's say $20,000. I think depending, some of the benefits of doing it as a teardown might be that you can get a renovation permit as opposed to if you keep the foundation in place or if you keep some aspect of the home, you might be able to have a less cost from a building permit perspective. But there are certainly markets where tear downs are, there's just no available land, so people are doing that. And those are typically higher price markets.
I guess I was thinking about it in terms of optional tear. In other words, I'm the homeowner, right? I don't want to renovate, but if your buildings are factory built, you can put it up in a couple of weeks, right? So right?
Yeah, to Brian's point, I mean, you have a couple of benefits there, right? It's that whole renovation versus new build, which also expedites time for approval of permitting in a lot of jurisdictions, because they'll prioritize renovation over new build, depending on what the OCP is for any given, jurisdiction. But lots of option there, I would think.
It just feels like a market niche that really we haven't talked about, right? Like I'm a homeowner. I own this house. It was built in 1979, and yeah, I could renovate it and get the new appliances put in, whatever. But you know what? Redoing plumbing is no joke. Redoing electrical systems from the 70s is not a small thing. So there's a point at which I just say screw it.
Exactly.
Right. Demolish the whole thing and then just put a new house on it. But new construction takes so long and is so painful that something like this might be an option, especially if I am a millennial and I bought, whatever house, and I'm like, I don't like this ranch, from the 70s.
Yeah.
Right. With the sunken living room and stuff. I'd want something more. It just seems like a market opportunity that really hasn't been fully explored. And I guess someone like Brian should talk to, City Builder, for example, and be like, hey, and then the second question, which is more of a high level question, because you began this thing and you've touched on this a couple of times, you almost wanted to do a B corporation, social enterprise, affordable housing. Why is this a better affordable housing solution than multifamily and rentals?
So, yeah, that's a great question. I think there's probably room, depending on the household type, there's room for both kinds of affordable housing. So like low income housing, like 30%. So I think of affordable housing in terms of percent median income. That's how the funding is measured in the United States. So you have low income households that might make 30% of the median income, right? The median income in Pittsburgh is about $50,000. So low-income household is making about 30% of that. They are really not financially able to buy a house given just the cost of upkeep. So renting is something that they sort of have to do, and that's why Section 8 and things like that exist. The affordable for sale housing, like the house on the far end that we built, which sold for $183,000, which is below the cost of a lot of renovation, almost any renovation on the street, below the cost of that. And again, we did that via grant subsidy, essentially securing a subsidy for that project from the local government. But that person, it's a minority, first-time home buyer, female buyer, she was able to get into that house. Now she makes about 60 to 80% of the median income in the city of Pittsburgh. So she's like kind of on the border where she could benefit from the being a homeowner, but may not have the budget necessarily to buy a house that wouldn't require a ton of renovation. So by us building that house for her, which is brand new, the cost of maintenance is going to be quite low. She's going to be able to get a really high quality home and live in a neighborhood that's going to appreciate over time. And so I think that's a really big benefit for the affordable for sale housing, because sometimes when you're in rental housing, you can't necessarily stick in the neighborhood. If the neighborhood gentrifies significantly and your landlord says, hey, we're stopping the leases, I'm gonna up the rent, then you can't stay in your neighborhood. But if you own your house, then no one can say, hey, I'm increasing your rent. Your property taxes might increase, but that's, I think, the benefit of affordable home ownership.
There's something here that I feel like NAR needs to be doing. That's Lynette, that's kind of what I keep thinking. Like, affordability is a major issue for the whole industry, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because in addition to NAR, almost the entire industry across North America and Canada have somewhere in their strategic priorities as an industry affordability and contributing on that advocacy component to the affordable housing cause. And just super quickly, just this past week, I went through a process. I've been invited by our federal government to sit on a panel that was evaluating applications around data approaches to enhancing the affordable housing availability or addressing the affordable housing challenge. And, one of the biggest pieces, and what I'm so glad to hear from your experience, Brian, is that you were able to access some of that subsidization as a for-profit commercial entity to actually bring that product to market. Because that's one of the biggest sticking challenges is, on this panel, we're evaluating 60 applications, and I'm the only person that was like, yeah, we should be funding some of these for-profit commercialized entities because they're the ones that are actually able to get out here and put the product on the ground, right? The problem with the approach generally is jurisdictions, governments can't, right? Because they get into that you can't play favorites, but you can pick and choose your clientele, just enable you, right? So, I can't agree more, Rob. I think, these are the types of initiatives that industry should be partnering with more. And I'm glad to see that you're doing some stuff, Brian, to work with the industry and the realtor community. So I think the more you can educate that community, that's where that groundswell happens, right? I mean, NAR can decide to do this. You know this, Rob, right?
Yeah.
NAR can decide to do it, but if it doesn't resonate with their membership, or if the membership sees that it's, competing with their business, that's kind of where that conversation ends. But the more you can get the membership on side in these local markets, I think I agree, there's something here. But,
I guess what I'm saying, I'm looking at it almost maybe too simplistically, right? NAR would benefit if the members have more inventory to sell. NAR membership does not make a whole lot of money around rentals. NAR has enormous power and influence around issues of affordable housing, right? If they could somehow convince a city or some government to say, hey, instead of building this multifamily low rise, right, and turning it into rentals, maybe take a shot at O'Brien, right, and build the low rise whatever or row houses, but it's ownership, right, for that 60 to 8% median income families. I mean, that's an affordable housing need that they have. But now you have private ownership, and then the members benefit because they're going to be able to sell more property.
Okay, but just wait. What if it's not NAR? What if it's the dudes with Howard Hanna?
Maybe it's Howard Hanna. Yeah, they got a ton of money.
They've got lots of money, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of these brokerages and franchises have cash available, and they're part of the solution, right? I don't know that it necessarily needs to be the industry organization that moves this, but I think working in conjunction with industry is absolutely, the ticket.
There's something here. We'll have to discuss it further. But sorry, Brian.
Little debate.
That's great.
Internal debate there.
I mean, Howard Hanna on this project, they essentially, waived their normal fee because that was going to increase the kind of cost to the end client. So they would be a great example. I mean, they're obviously local here in Pittsburgh, but I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say it, just to thread that in a little bit further. I mean, you mentioned the fact that you're maybe not ideally suited for traditional venture capital, right? But there's a lot of capital available. And, I think to your point, who's looking for supply, right? You're in the business of offering supply, and you are also in this unique opportunity to be able to do it in a really efficient way. And, and so, you're part of a bigger solution, more so than just providing the odd, 5 or 10 houses into the market. There's an opportunity to create an entire sort of product offering that, back to one of Albert's points earlier, we always look for the scaling opportunity. Well, maybe this is it, right? And maybe this is the groundswell of where it begins.
I mean, Howard Hanna, I was just thinking about them. They're a big, giant, they're, right? I could easily see them saying, look, let's take 10 million. Let's just develop a bunch of lots because they have the mortgage. They have the real estate. In other words, they're going to make that back in ancillary. It's funny to think about ancillary revenue as ancillary, not to brokerage, but ancillary to construction.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Something like that. It makes a ton of sense, right?
Yeah.
I think you guys should have Helen Hanna on and pitch that idea, and I'll just hang out in the comment room.
Or you could just ask Helen to, we'll help you. We'll sell it for you. It's like, hey, Helen, fund Brian.
Before we give Brian 3 years of work, right? I'd love to hear from you, Brian. Actually, what are your ambitions? What's your team and your ambitions for how you want Module to go? Because I think it's great that you admitted this is not a VC play. You know what I mean? I think that's great that a startup is like, look, this is not really a VC play.
No.
And And I agree with that. I think like, so, and I think there's too much focus put on startups of like scaling and becoming $1 billion and going private, going public and all of this stuff. There's a lot of Kool-Aid out there on this and not enough focus on business. So I'm actually curious on what you think and what your impressions, like, would you be happy with having a company that's literally a small team of people that love each other and love the work they're doing, and they're doing maybe 10 houses a year, they love it, it's profitable enough to feed yourself, right? Like, and you know, and something that's sustainable, and you have a niche position in the industry, like people love your houses, but it's not for everybody, right? Would you be happy with that? Is that your ambition? Or is it like, do you want to change the industry? Do you want to be Tesla? Do you want to, right? Do you want to change the entire way homes are made? I'd love to hear kind of your top line perspective on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think what we've learned is there's a way to build a really great business here, right? It may not be the business that makes it is strictly a kind of a financial instrument business, but there's a great cash flow business to be created here. And I think that's what we've stumbled onto. So, you know, we still ask ourselves the question, how can we get, you know, we're looking at like 100 or 250 homes a year. How can we get to that scale? That's the kind of scale that we're trying to think about and prepare for. So I think, you know, so that may not be a $1 billion company, but that's a company that's producing a lot of housing. And I think what I get really excited about is enabling other people to do this, right? It can't be us going into every market and putting boots on the ground. How can we enable realtors in other areas or developers or builders to build a really good product? That's what gets me really excited. But I do think if you had to choose between having a great team that's a profitable business, that you know you can make a good living on it and make people happy, I think I would choose that over you know, selling a dream that you and others may know may not necessarily happen, right? I think I've learned that that's, you know, there's just certain limitations, I think, to certain types of businesses, given the business model and given the things that, you know, that we care about. And so I think, you know, we're thinking about how can you get to 250 homes a year? That's kind of the goalpost that we're setting. And then we figure, okay, if we get there, then hey, then we could really do anything we wanted at that point.
I think that's so cool, Brian.
Yeah.
So here's my question of you. What keeps you up at night on that journey?
You know, what's kept me up is, I think, you know, from a funding perspective, we're trying to find the right types of investors into our business, right? Because we're not cash flow positive yet. So how do we find investors that see the need for this in the industry, see a potential to make returns? But at the end of the day, we're still undercapitalized, right? It's kind of a miracle that we've been able to build what we've built, given the capital we've raised. So I think generally I would love to see our team in a position where we can be, you know, in growth mode coming out of kind of COVID. You know, I think 2020 was a year for everyone to just kind of hang on tight and like play catch up. So I think what keeps me up at night is, okay, how can we, like, we have our head above water now. Like, how can we really start to make some strategic conversations?
It's brilliant.
Awesome. So I have one last question. So I might be really off base here, but just hearing today's conversation, I have a certain picture of what you guys want to do, and I want you to tell me if that's right or wrong. That's essentially my question. So
I like it.
It seems like to me you have a business where very crowded market, right? Lots of alternatives, but you're trying to make awesome homes, right? That's what it seems like. You are trying to make awesome, like kind of next level cool stuff, cool homes for a relatively cheap thing. Relatively affordable price is what it seems like to me. That's, again, I know there's more than that, but so to me, brand becomes really important then in that kind of thing. So if it's not this industry changing thing, and if it's not this like scale play right now, then it's about like, hey, we make homes, they're awesome, and whoever buys them, they're gonna love it, and they're gonna tell their friends, and we want to love it, like, right? So it seems like there's a brand piece here that you know, if we compare back to Tesla, right? Like they really cared about how awesome the cars looked, and they really cared about brand, even when they were making roadsters, right? So I'm curious how you think through that piece about your brand, about Modular as a brand, about your homes. Do you have like module home branding, like, right? Or specific kind of distinguishing features in your homes where you're like, where the owner can be like, hey, this home, right, has this because it's a
Yeah.
modular, right? Like, I'm curious what your thoughts
So-
are around
Yeah,
that.
I mean, in terms of branding, I kind of live and breathe, right? I've got my module hoodie on here, obviously, as any good startup founder does. But I live in one of these houses. You know, I'm one of the first early adopters. So
You're eating your dog food. You're
I'm
eating your
eating my dog food.
Yeah.
And in this duplex unit, I live on the bottom of our show home. And so I think that, you know, for people who are thinking, hey, should I become a modular homeowner? I'm like, well, I wouldn't, you know, if you're not living your own product, then what does that say about it? So in terms of brand, Drew, who's our chief product officer, he really is very thoughtful about the brand that we've built. And we have a pretty great following of people who care about what we're doing, even if they may never become a customer. We have a lot of these fans, I'll call them, and our newsletter subscriber who follow us on social. And, you know, I think the best summary of our brand was we like put out this impact report at the end of last year, 2020 impact report on our website. And that I think speaks to the things that we care about. And I like, for example, Sid, who bought this house, he's like, yeah, I'm so excited to be part of this, you know, development. He lived in a really large house several blocks down and was looking to downsize. And he's like, man, I was so excited when I was finally, like, I didn't think the home would be on the market at the time when I was selling my house. And he's like, I just was incredibly excited to be part of this development. And the fact that I can help because there's an affordable home next door, like me being part of this can help sort of make someone else be able to enter this neighborhood is incredible. So like that's, to me, that's what the brand is. That's how I think about it.
I love it. Love it. I'm
Well,
done.
all right. You know, I feel like we could keep Brian for another hour or two, but frankly, I see the sun is setting.
The sun is
you know-
sitting outside in Brian's eyes.
I know. So let me thank you so much, Brian, for your time, for showing us the house. I do love what you guys are doing. Like I said, it's there's something happening in construction, is how I feel. You know, that there's if there was a huge revolution in real estate industry because of the internet, I feel like construction industry as a whole is going through a massive disruption and change, and it's just awesome to be able to talk to a founder who's, you know, kind of as smart as you are and as dedicated to this, you know, as you are. So hopefully we'll be able to talk to you again. And I do think, because like you and Albert were talking about how maybe this is not a VC play, but this might be a play where you could use a lot more industry partners, you know, and that's something that we actually hopefully could help you with and connect you with some of those people. Like I said, I'd be shocked if Brian Hickey's not calling you up and be like, hey man, what kind of solution you got for me? You know, and that. So with that, I think we want to say thank you and farewell and good luck.
Yeah.
Godspeed.
Thanks so much, Brian.
And the three of us will stick around and do some little final thought kind of, you know, stuff. All right.
Sounds good. It was great meeting you all. Thanks for having me.
Thanks,
You
Brian.
too, Brian.
Thanks,
Take
Brian.
care.
Bye now. All right. That was interesting.
All right.
What y'all think?
Oh God, I'll start.
Yeah.
And I want to start with a broader kind of concept before I go. So I thought this was really refreshing, and I'll tell you what was refreshing about it is I met a lot of startups in the past that were very big picture focused, and they were very tech focused, and they were, oh, we want to be a platform, blah, blah, blah. But there was nothing physical. There was nothing they were building, or that what they were building was like some, wireframe that looks like, okay, and unfortunately, I think a lot of startups have fallen into that. Like, here's our idea and just fund us. And they'll do that for years. And they'll go to competitions and do that stuff for years without anything that they're doing. So I actually love like the fact that they're building something. They have a product and it's a real physical thing. And to not get to drink too much Kool-Aid. So I find that incredibly refreshing. And I think that they can, they're still a startup. It's still a startup. It's just a certain type of startup that's grinding it away a little different way. So I just wanted to definitely start with that. I love like actual product, you know what I mean? Like that can sell for money, like it's really straightforward. So I just wanted to start with that.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Albert. I mean, to be honest with you, I thought there was going to be a lot more of a technology component to this. And, ultimately, and in the spirit of not diving into this and just coming into this cold, I didn't do a whole bunch of, sort of back end reconnaissance. So I was a bit surprised that, they really are filling kind of just that traditional kind of construction space. They're a home builder for all intents and purposes, right? And so I guess the piece, like, as the conversation evolved, that would be interesting to follow on here is, maybe some thinking around how they do or could leverage technology, because I think that's a component that will continue to evolve even in that home building space. And, we just held a panel of venture of VC yesterday, and, 2 of the 4 clearly identified construction investment as a top priority for them. It's in their thesis, right? And so I appreciate that maybe for Brian's solution, VC isn't really the right path, but maybe it is. And I think, I think it would be nice to kind of hear some of these new guys turning their head toward that. And so, and I don't have the answer for that, but I think there's a demand, there's a money demand there. There's a supply of money that's focusing on that area. And it seems, unfortunate if guys like Brian don't take advantage of that, is all I'm saying. And then the only other component that, I maybe thought of a little bit late, and Rob, it was kind of your last question that piqued it for me was, the partnership question. Like, I think that's really interesting, particularly for guys in this sector, where there is a lot of noise. I think the types of partnerships you create and the differentiation of value of those partnerships are equally what will differentiate you in the market, as opposed to just filling the same gap as 100 other people, but slightly differently. So, but other than that, I mean, really love him, love his kind of story, great solution. The house looks great. I mean, I felt like I could live in a house like that when he kind of walked us in. So I think all of those things check boxes, and yeah, I think it's great.
So just to kind of piggyback onto that and a little bit more onto what my initial thoughts were, again, on when I look at the startup ecosystem, when I look at startups, again, people think that there's only like one path, right?
Yeah,
and
totally.
Don't remember that, look, fundamentally, you're just creating something that you love or you want to see in the market, right? And that has to be real to me. That has to be authentic. And that authenticity shows up when you've grinded away for years and years and you've built a home. You know what I mean? And you've shipped product, and you look at it and you love it or you hate it, and so you improve on it. So that's what it seems like their phase is at right now, their stage. And so to complicate that by saying, and the reason why I don't think venture capital is a great moment for that right now is because once you start taking venture capital, there's a time frame immediately, right? Like, you got to hit your next milestone, and they're not going to wait 10 years until you get it right? So I'm like, the phase you're at right now, and you've raised some funding to build your homes, like, focus in on that is what I just want to see these beautiful homes that they love. And I love that he lives in his own home, right? Because I think scalability can come from that, honestly, right? Like, it's like Blue Bottle or something, right? Like that's why I mentioned brand before. When you don't have a specific technical or other type of comparative advantage, maybe in the end, it's just that you have an awesome product that people want to buy, right? And and there's scalability there if it's good enough. And again, you don't have to want to scale to the entire world for it to have an impact. So that's my my thought.
So
please disagree, somebody.
No, it's great. And the thing that I don't, there's something about this that I love, and there's something about this that I don't love, right? And I'm trying to figure out what that is. And and I think what it comes down to is, what I love about it is kind of what Albert mentioned. They're actually building stuff, and this product is something that the world actually needs. You know what I mean? What I don't love about it maybe is getting triggered because of your question around brand, right? And then when I'm asking about, like, what's the demographic, right, of your actual clients, and he's talking about, it's Tesla drivers, it's people who love Tesla. And, where my mind went immediately was, okay, like, that's literally the top 10% income, it's this, I don't even know what to call it. It's this demographic that we all kind of recognize. Do you know what I mean? It's the Lululemon, Tesla, et cetera. And I'm like, that audience, to me, I feel like they prioritize different things. In other words, and let me put it bluntly. If I were that demographic, right? I've got the Tesla and I make 250,000 a year and this and that. I'm not buying from Module. I'm buying from Modern. I'm buying from European companies that have won international awards already. I'm buying from Go Home. Buying from A-Frame. I'm not buying from Module, right? So that's what I think maybe what kind of bugs me. Whereas the opportunity might be, especially because they're in Pittsburgh, right? And I know Pittsburgh, like any other city, has the Tesla crowd and has the, the Carnegie Mellon computer science people. But I'm like, but Pittsburgh is fundamentally steel. Like their team is called the Steelers. There's an element of that blue collar American brand, if you will, right? And I almost feel like, I wonder if Brian and that group should think about what modular home would the guy driving a Ford 150 want instead of the Tesla, right?
Yep.
And I know that's culture. I know that's that, but I can't help but shake it.
But I can't, and the piece that I can't help but shake is, again, where they can maybe leverage technology. So I agree, for who they are and how they are right now, they don't need venture capital necessarily, not in the classic sense of venture capital. But maybe even to your point, Albert, in terms of really creating that niche brand, which maybe isn't Tesla, right? Maybe it's not, maybe it is more toward the blue collar market in Pittsburgh, and it's more toward the whatever the market is in Seattle if they enter that market. But here's where I think they have an opportunity is to really take data, right? There's all sorts of other, and so this is where I'm talking about partnership, right? Like there are all sorts of solutions out there now that really help you pinpoint location accuracy. So even in existing communities, right? I want to know what the noise level is. I want to know what my walkability score is. I want to know what my accessibility, all of those things, right? But layer that on top of, okay, I'm working with Brian now. I'm building my modular home. He has 7 different lots where I can pick. I want to be able to really feel that community before I agree that that's the product I'm going to buy from Brian, that house on that lot, right? I think that to me is a little bit of the magic. And if he can begin to build that piece out where he's really creating this unique full-scale offering to the marketplace where it's not just the house on the geography, it's that ability to kind of really feel that geography, if it's that blue collar neighborhood or, and I think then with a model like that, Rob, that's how you sell that to the industry. That's how you sell it to the industry. And it's no longer, the burbs, or it's no longer inner city, low income affordability. It's an affordable unit in a desirable community. And, I think this to me is the thin edge of the wedge of starting to affect how you get out of some of the larger social questions like racial divide and like long story, but this is where I see opportunity for something like this, right? Different than other builders and other developers bring to market.
Yeah. I haven't thought about it real deeply. I'm just looking at like their furniture choices, their color schemes, their the stainless steel with the light blonde wood, very Scandinavian look. And I'm like, totally. This looks like everything that me and all my friends would want, right? Except that's not, I don't think the audience, I don't feel like that's the demographic. That's really where the opportunity lies for him. I feel like the demographic where it really lies for him is exactly that person he was talking about, 60 to 80% of median income, right? So they're not rich. They're not even in the upper half, right? Affordable housing in a blue collar town where the factor, you know what I mean? Like the old 80s economy was destroyed, but you still have people live there and have lived there for generations. Could something like this be a solution for that group? I would think so, right? I would think so. So I don't know. I think it's maybe a branding play, but it's also a further understanding of like where really is our ideal demographic, where really is our sweet spot. And so I love like how Albert was asking, like, what's your sweet spot? What's your sweet spot? And I just kept coming back to that, right? Because I'm like, if you're going after the Tesla crowd, they're going to buy foreign. They're going to buy the award winners. So until you've won a bunch of awards, until you've done that, it's really hard to get at that crowd. If you go to the blue collar, if you will, the average American, like more that crowd, I think you could offer them something that's like, why pay $300 for a house when you could get even nicer for $200, for $180, for $100 a foot? You know what I mean? So I don't know. Maybe they need to focus a little bit more on the affordability aspect of it and try to downplay.
Well, I think that is the piece, is the focus. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the key word that pops out to me after this entire conversation. Hearing you guys is focus, right? We need a much clearer focus of what they're trying to do, what they're trying to create. I think Brian gets that too.
I think so.
And I think they're also trying to, like, they're learning by doing right now, right? This is very early stage for them. 5 houses, that's like they just got their prototypes out. Yep. They're now starting to get like their next round out, right? And I think the worst thing you can do is to a startup like this, either internally or externally, is to rush them and to tell them they have to like do this or do that or hit this or hit that. But instead get back to like, what do you want to create? Who are you doing it for? And how is that going to be awesome? And just focus in on that. And I actually think that's the heart of brand, right? Is to know that, and then it grows out of that. So is this the company that we're going to see next year, being this like huge scale, like darling? I don't really see that. But on the flip side, can this be a company that builds amazing homes in a new, different way, right? And that people start loving it, and that it can start making a splash in that way? I do see it that way. So all those like design aspects or kind of some of their decisions, hey, they're better at that than us three sitting in our rooms. You know what I mean? They've been thinking about that shit for like years.
No, I know.
You're right. So it's more about, to me, what do we do when a company like this comes along? To me, these are really good companies, right? If they really care about what they're doing.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking Module in any way. What I'm thinking is at the industry level, right? The ideal partnership in my mind looks something like this, where Howard Hanna, which is it's a giant multi-state, enormously profitable, enormously powerful company. Imagine something like this, where Howard Hanna partners with Module, right? Tells all of their, I think they have 16,000 agents, right? Who are mostly working in Pittsburgh, Ohio, Kentucky, like that area, right? If what we might have called the Rust Belt, right? And be able to go to them and say, listen, why not introduce this idea to your clients, to your buyers, right? Because we know like inventory is at an all, it's just not existent, right? Instead of it being this is a fixer-upper, right? Could you maybe tell them, buy the home, do the demolition, just tear it down, and then we will work with you to put one of these module homes on this site, right? And guess what? It's going to be a lot cheaper than you waiting for the right house to come along, and a cash buyer is going to step in. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost opening up opportunities maybe for sort of more lower income buyers who aren't going to be paying cash. And by the way, Howard Hanna, we can write a mortgage that's special. And I feel like, I know it's just at an ideal level, but I do feel like there's something there, right?
The reason why I'm pushing back a little bit against what you're saying right now, and what Lynette, you were saying before about getting like getting the context right, and making that magic happen. The reason why I'm pushing back against that a little bit is because this is a small team, that they are so bombarded right now, I think, to try to create homes. And when you put even one task on top of that, that's really difficult. Even a partnership, I think, is really difficult to pull off, right? So that's why I'm pushing back a little bit.
Yeah, and I see that part of it, Albert. But again, let me come back at this one more time. I think there are two components to that from my point of view. And it does come back to focus. Number one, until they get really crystal clear on what they are trying to accomplish, even continuing to do what they do is going to get them somewhere. But is it going to get them where they ultimately want to go? And that does dovetail into, okay, now you have figured it kind of out, whatever it is, right? Are you clear about the type of partnerships that will leverage you ahead, right? And so I think, I don't think you need to get the context perfectly right, but I do believe at a startup stage, you need to start dipping your toe in the water and testing this. It is the conversation with Helen Hanna to say, hey, what about this as an idea? Is this something we can maybe try on a couple of units and see how it feels, right? Because you're right, they are building houses, but if you can do it now with a partner that levers you forward faster, then that is true startup mentality. And
Yeah.
so that's I think it's the tipping point almost from my perspective for where they are versus like they want to get to 250 houses a year from 5. Like that's a significant scale.
Yeah.
Right. In this area, that's significant scale. And so it's going to take significantly more resources.
Yeah.
So, they're going to need some partnerships. They're going to need some backing somehow.
But that's why I'm bringing Howard Hanna as the ideal partner, because
I agree.
Howard Hanna's got the financing piece. In other words, Howard Hanna's not financing these guys. Howard Hanna's financing the buyer. And they have a business. It's a mortgage lending business. That's what they do. They want to sell a house to Howard Hanna has that, right? The one thing that they don't have is, okay, now we've sold this idea. Who's going to build the actual house? I'm like, well, that's where Module could step in. That's kind of what I mean, right?
Look at they like exactly. Module is solving the supply side of the equation that Howard Hanna can't otherwise solve themselves, right? Otherwise, they've got the demand side. They're going to finance the buyer. They're going to support, and to your point, Rob, they're going to make money on all that ancillary, right?
Yeah.
But they now partner, and Module partners with them to ensure that that the supply demand side of the equation is balanced. And I love that approach.
Yeah, all I'm saying is all that Howard Hanna has to really think about doing is interfacing the purchase loan with the construction loan, right? Because that's where things are going to get a little tricky. Well, okay, come up with a program. Oh, you're looking for affordable housing. You meet this criteria. We're going to create this new special loan program where we're going to start it off. We're going to help you buy this property, right? And then do a construction loan that turns into a regular, normal, FHA or 30-year fixed rate, purchase loan. I mean, there's got to be a way, right? But I'm saying they're the perfect solution. And then on the branding side, I'm saying, it's Howard Hanna to me is the perfect brand. Because Howard Hanna lives that Pittsburgh, Ohio brand presence. They're not Compass, right? They're not Sotheby's, right?
Exactly.
And to me, the Tesla driver is Compass and it's Sotheby's. So that's, I think, if I were advising Brian in any way, it would be that. Like, understand where you're coming from, understand your roots. And I got to tell you, Pittsburgh ain't Tesla. It's not Blonde Wood. It's not Scandinavian. It's not Starbucks. Pittsburgh is lunch pail. It's Chevy trucks, that sort of thing.
Totally.
All right. So, were you trying to wait for Drew?
Yeah.
Or what
No. We want to wrap up the live stream.
Cool.
Wrap this up. Yeah.
All right. Well, in that case,
thanks, guys.
Thank you, Lynette. Thank you, Albert.
Yeah. Thanks,
Pedro, in the background, working the production magic, and of course, thanks to Brian for coming on and telling us about Module and his story. It's a great company, great story. All right, and thank you guys for tuning in. Bye, everybody.